If you ask the average Runescape player what their least favourite skill is, you'll probably notice a little bit of a pattern amongst the people answering. Or you would, if there was actually anyone left in the community to even ask that question to in the first place. Either way, we all know that Jagex has released some questionable skills over the years. I really think there's just one that stands higher above the rest, and as much as it pains me to say, being one of my personal favourite skills, it's gotta be Dungeoneering. So let's delve a little bit deeper and find out why players seem to dislike this skill so much, and what sort of issues is it facing in the current state of the game. Surely that wave of nostalgia is gonna hit, and it's gonna save it from being as bad as we remember though, right? Well, we're about to find out. Let's go. Let's take it straight from the top and talk about what Dungeoneering is as a skill. Dungeoneering was RuneScape's 25th skill, released on the 12th of April 2010. This skill revolves around partying up with 4 of your mates, puzzle solving, skilling, and killing your way through the dungeons of Demonheim. Sounds pretty sweet, huh? Well, it would if it wasn't for a couple of Jagex moments that have come up over the years and never really got fixed. With that in mind, let's look at some of the problems this skill has and what it is that's causing players to not want to engage with this skill in its current form. Alright, so here's number 1, and probably the biggest issue surrounding Dungeoneering. This skill, is built and optimized around having a team of 5 people, which wouldn't be a problem if your clan hadn't been dead for 3 years and your last in real life friend hadn't quit in 2011. So how in the world are we supposed to go about finding a team nowadays? Well, that's easy. You just go to World 77, the Dungeoneering homeworld. Okay, that's pretty empty. Let's try World 2, the busiest world in the game. Or World 84. Pretty empty as well. Or how about we wait until the next double XP live and then we can train it then? It's only a 3-month wait, right? Let's face it, there's no easy way to find a 5-man Dungeoneering team, and that's a really big problem when your skill is optimized around having 5 people to do a dungeon with. If you're a dinosaur like me, you might remember a time where it was actually really easy to find a 5-man Dungeoneering team. But over the years, the player base has declined significantly, and with the introduction of other ways to train the skills, such as sinkholes, daily challenges, elite dungeons, and the famous Dungeoneering hole in the summer events, which I hear is the perfect place to AFK and watch your favorite YouTuber, which is, me, obviously. Jesus, what was that bit? Almost died of cringe. Don't let me do that again, please. It's for my own good. Wait, where were we again? Oh, yeah, Dungeoneering. Players really just aren't incentivized to participate in the biggest part of the skill, which is either solo or team Dungeoneering in Demonheim, which to me kind of defeats the entire purpose of this skill. But before you tear my head off for not understanding the importance of having alternative ways to train the skill, I just want to say I agree with you. I think it's really important to have other ways and especially less intense ways of training skills. But it just doesn't sit right with me that due to the passing of time and just the state of the game, this skill has become simply too inconvenient to engage with now. We're not completely out of options when it comes to doing Dungeoneering within Demonheim. Obviously we do still have solos, but there's a few problems with those as well, which we'll go into now. So the biggest problem I've had with solo dungeons is that compared to group dungeons, the XP rates are really not balanced well. What I mean by this is when you compare the solo and the group Dungeoneering XP rates over the course of an hour, you'll notice there's quite a big difference between the two, which really doesn't make sense to me considering that both group and solo Dungeoneering are both really high input and intensity activities if you want them to be, and you could even argue that solo Dungeoneering is even harder than group Dungeoneering, because you have more ground to cover by yourself and less gate stones that you can actually utilize to get around the dungeon quickly. Let's do a bit of quick math to compare the XP rates for both solo and group Dungeoneering on high warp floor runs. For the solo XP rates, you can see here that I was getting about 250,000 XP per floor, with a floor ranging from 20 minutes to 25 minutes on a bad luck run. And for the group XP rates, you're just going to have to trust me because, ironically enough, I wasn't able to find a team to test these for myself properly. For a group warped floor, you're going to be looking at about 220,000 XP per run, and a decent team should be able to finish one of these in about 10 to 15 minutes apiece. So let's add those numbers up and generate our hourly XP rate for solo and group Dungeoneering, and then compare the two. Wow, would you look at that? Those numbers couldn't be further apart. Assuming that you're doing 5 group dungeons per hour, you're going to almost double the XP rate of someone doing Dungeoneering solo. This really doesn't make sense to me, considering that both of these require similar inputs and are actually a similar activity, so why is one so much more XP an hour than the other? Saying that, there's enough lore in Demonheim, you could probably find a book that explains why group Dungeoneering is better than solo when I think about it. Back to the point, it just feels plain bad knowing that you can't participate in some of the best XP per hour in a skill, just because it's too hard to find a team nowadays. That just sucks. We're all stuck with that unpleasant feeling, knowing that we could be doing the exact same activity for more XP an hour, but we just can't access it. But that's just the elephant in the room, or should I say, the behemoth in the dungeon. Look, that was terrible, but we still got plenty more bones to pick with this skill. We're just scratching the surface. Alright, so now it's time to put the actual gameplay itself on blast. I hope you're strapped in and ready for this one. Number 1 is puzzles that are just generally toxic to complete. Now, if you're one of the unfortunate souls that max this skill out by actually doing dungeoneering floors, you've probably pushed these puzzles to a dark place in your brain as a repressed memory. So let me just remind you what they were like real quick. Here are some of my personal favorites. Annoying plant cutting puzzle that makes you stand around doing nothing for ages. Bookshelf puzzle that also makes you wait around doing nothing for a while. And lastly, this barrel puzzle that's somehow made worse by needing 102 strength boost. I could keep going on, but I think you get what I mean at this point. Similar to the puzzles, we've also got bosses which are just generally unfun to fight due to time-gated mechanics. Instead of bosses going immortal for 30 seconds at a time 4 times in a kill, why not just chuck a whole bunch of health on them instead? At least that way I can get some dopamine for hitting some numbers on them while I wait around. Talking about hitting bosses, you won't be doing much of that on the bosses that aren't time-gated, because most of them are defense walls as a carryover from the pre-EOC days. Which is a shame because there's some really awesome mechanics on some of the bosses, it's just overshadowed by the ones that are absolutely awful. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Blink, you're the worst. Alright, so number 3 is skilling in key doors that you need to click 3 times before you can even enter the room. Now I get that this one probably is a little bit petty, but having that small wait time every time you need to go through a door just makes the skill feel so clunky. Especially when the entire premise of the skill is moving from one room to another room, you're going to be feeling this delay a lot. Even more in the large dungeons too, because there's just so many rooms and doors. Next up we got the prestige system, which is a really great concept because it encourages people to explore every dungeon before resetting. The prestige system works well if you're a lower level at dungeoneering, because your XP scaling per floor is a lot more flat than it would be if you had access to the full 60. This is where a problem comes in for high level dungeoneers, where the XP is so bad for the floors 1 through 36, that you might as well just skip them all together and get to the higher level floors quicker. Which kind of sucks because the prestige system isn't working at this point. It's not encouraging you to complete all the floors anymore. It's just heavily handicapping you for not doing the floors, especially the ones that you don't want to do anyway because they're such bad XP. For those that aren't aware, these 1 through 36 rushes can take you about an hour to do, even with a really good 5-man team. You'll be needing to do these 1 through 36 rushes fairly often, especially if you've got a 5-man team that can knock through maybe 5 or 6 dungeons an hour. And when you've only got 25 dungeons left to complete, it's only going to take you about 5 hours till your team's knocked through all of those and you need to do your rushes again. This means that about 20% of your time dungeoneering is going to be spent doing these pointless rushes just so the prestige system doesn't penalize you. It's really easy to see why people generally don't like this skill. You have to spend so much time doing stuff that you don't want to do. It just does not feel good to train. Next up, we got the rewards for dungeoneering being overall pretty average. Let's really think about it. When was the last time you actually saved up your dungeoneering tokens and bought something you really wanted? Yep, I can't either. Although I can't deny there are some absolutely standout rewards, like the Ring of Vigor and the Charming Imp, there are many more awful rewards to go with it. Let me refresh your memory. When was the last time you saw someone thinking about a shield bow sight, mercenary gloves, or a nature staff? I certainly haven't in the last 10 years, and I wouldn't have remembered if I didn't go out of my way to look for weird items in the Dungeoneering store. God knows there's plenty more where those ones came from. Look, I ain't saying that every item in the game has to have a use or needs to be best in slot for something, but I think Dungeoneering could offer a little bit more. Especially considering you'll rack up about 10 million tokens on the way to 120. Realistically, you can probably buy every useful dungeoneering item for about 1.5 million tokens. So what do you do with the other 8.5 million? That's easy, of course. You spend them on skips for the 1 through 36s that you didn't want to do because the prestige system sucks ass. Dungeoneering tokens are more like an Ouroboros of disappointment as opposed to an actual useful currency in the game. And again, why would someone train dungeoneering for dungeoneering tokens that are mostly worthless after maybe the first 10 mil XP? Doesn't make sense to me, especially when their level cap's 120. If you thought the rewards for dungeoneering tokens themselves were bad, you should see how bad the unlocks for the actual skill are. 99% of your unlocks are going to be completely restricted to Demonheim, basically just being extra floors and extra bosses, which is cool because you get extra XP per hour, but doesn't really offer much for the wider game, which is even worse when you remember you can't take items out at Demonheim. It's almost completely inconsequential to your progress outside of the skill, which is kind of weird. You can really see why people call this a minigame instead of a skill. It just doesn't really integrate well with the rest of the game. What about the other 1% of rewards you can actually access outside of Demonheim? What's going on with those? Honestly, not much. I can't deny there are some good ones like the Frost Dragon Cave and the Calgarian Demons, but when was the last time you heard of a player being excited to access extra blue dragons inside the Tavli dungeon? Or even worse, the secret Alcarad mine. I forgot that even existed. I do absolutely love the idea of these resource dungeons that you unlock through the skill. My god, have they aged worse than milk. Second thoughts, I think aging worse than milk is generous. More like aging worse than the entire fletching skill. Talking about fletching, it's a good thing we got the Demonheim Peninsula resource dungeon, where we can cut maple trees to string longbows. These resource dungeons really do hit home with the tropes of Runescape from 2012. I'm surprised an NPC in one of them hasn't asked me to be his GF for 10k yet. At least I can get 1 HP Darrock bombed by nostalgia by going to these places. That's kind of a selling point, I guess. Look, that was a lot of negatives, but I don't want to be entirely damning of this skill. Now, before you click off, because you've heard everything you need to know about Dungeoneering, let me stop you real quick, because I want to remind you about some of the positives of this skill that you might have forgotten about. Probably my favourite thing about Dungeoneering is that it has quite a high skill ceiling that rewards active gameplay and actually getting better at the skill mechanically. Dungeoneering at high levels feels very reminiscent of speedrunning games, because as you learn some of the skills and the optimizations, you can absolutely blast through the floors with such amazing flow. It just feels really, really good. This is awesome because it feels like you're leveling up with the skill. You're not just pushing the number up, you're actually getting better at it. Let's take mining for example. From level 1 to 120, it can take 300 hours. And over this time, are you going to be getting mechanically better at the game or any better at mining itself? Well, no. The skill ceiling and the skill floor are basically aligned with each other. You're not actually getting better at the skill regardless of how much time you get. And the only sense of progression is making the number go up. Having that high skill ceiling makes Dungeoneering feel more interactive than any other skill in the game in my opinion. The game could really benefit from having the opportunity to train other skills in a similar fashion, instead of giving you that false impression of progression that most other skills do, where you're just AFK doing the exact same activity for a really long time, then wait for the number to go up. Bottom line is, I think more skills should have a high skill ceiling option and a lower skill ceiling option for lower XP rates, because it just caters to more different types of players. Let's face it, AFKing and hitting rocks for 300 hours really just isn't for everyone, but neither is running through a dungeon spamming on doors. I don't see why we can't just cater to both. Probably my next favourite thing about Dungeoneering is that when you put the outdated graphics aside, you've got some of the coolest armors and the coolest bosses in the entire game. I could give so many examples here, but let me just throw up some of my personal favorites for you. Could you imagine a graphical rework of these things? They would look absolutely awesome. Jagex did such a good job of capturing the energy of Demonheim and projecting it into these grotesque and mysterious bosses that you encounter at the end of every dungeon. I absolutely love them, and this is some of the best artwork they've ever done in my opinion. This feels even better as you send deeper into the dungeons of Demonheim, unlocking more lore history and really immersing yourself in why you're there in the first place. It's really awesome and contributes nicely into that sense of progression you get. I want to go over quickly some of the changes I think might be beneficial to Demonheim. Obviously, I want to preface this by saying I'm not a game developer and I don't know jack shit about this. If it's anything like the rest of the game's older content, Demonheim is probably plagued with spaghetti code that literally cannot be unraveled at this point. JMods probably need 120 invention to even attempt fixing Demonheim at this point. So number one, I think Jagex should increase the solo Dungeoneering XP rates to bring them in line better with the group Dungeoneering XP rates. This will encourage more people to Dungeoneer in Demonheim, just because you don't feel like you're missing out by not doing group dungeons. This also makes it easier to pick up a floor here and there, as opposed to committing to doing a ton of dungeons in a row with an organised team. Next up, I'd love to see some revision of the Dungeoneering store and the actual resource dungeons you unlock through Dungeoneering. I think there's a lot of opportunity here that just hasn't been touched on since the skill's birth. Given there's so much more content in the game now, I think Jagex could do a lot more things with these and make them much more interesting for the average player. And lastly, I think the prestige system could do what they're looking at, so you're not forced to do floors 1 through 36 as skips at the higher levels. To be honest, I have no idea how you'd fix this. Maybe some mechanic that takes your level into account when collecting XP for the floor. It has diminishing returns as you progress through the higher floors, so you don't just get exponentially more XP as you go up. But hey, I'm not a game dev and I have no idea how any of this works. I just enjoy Dungeoneering sometimes. It's a cool skill. That's just about everything I can say about why people hate Dungeoneering so much. I hope I wasn't too far off the mark with these thoughts, and I'd love to see what your thoughts are about Dungeoneering in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.